stuff, and then you graduate. Then you graduate, you know. That's how we learn everything, actually. It's the system we use, isn't it? You go gradually. And I mean, they call this the gradual path. We don't use that concept, but it's a very evident one. We know we learn gradually. And all the courses of study that we have in our world, and we're very good at this, are all taught like that. We're very good at it, actually. We're excellent at it in our culture. But I think it sometimes surprises us that a spiritual path is treated like that. I think in our views, we have some very strong misconceptions, assumptions about spiritual practice, you know. So, for example, when we hear about meditating on compassion, we think of that as we think of meditation as a fairly isolated moment in which something special happens. And it's an experience. We very strongly think it's an experience. You have to have an experience, you know. Have a spiritual experience. People talk about experiences or visions and things. I mean, that might be nice every now and again. That's not the point. That's how we treat meditation. That something should happen, you know. But actually, meditation, this is fundamental to understanding Mahamudra, but it's fundamental to understanding all the Buddhist view about meditation. Meditation is training. It's a way, there's brilliant techniques that have been developed over the centuries, starting with these genius Indians more than 3,000 years ago, techniques that enable us to really skillfully transform our mind from an ordinary, deluded, unhappy mind to a brilliant, enlightened mind. So it's not a question of getting series of experiences, it's training, just hard slog, one step at a time, you know. We never think of spiritual like that, I don't think. And we never think of it as gradual. The early stuff first, middle stuff, and then advanced stuff, you know. There's many, I think, quite strong misconceptions about meditation, I think, in the modern world. So I don't have to say that because anyone can have that word. Buddha doesn't own it. He hasn't got copyright on it. But we have very strong conceptions about what we think it is, don't we? But first of all, what's really curious in the Tibetan tradition to us is the word gom, the verb to meditate. It literally translates as to familiarize oneself with something, if you spell it out. That's quite confusing, you know. What do you mean, familiarize yourself with something? We don't quite know what it is, but we think it's something, but, you know, hippy-trippy. So in Mahamudra, as long as in every other method, in every other approach in Buddhism, there are two main ways of meditating. Two main modes of meditating. So I think let's discuss this tonight. Millions of techniques. Once you know clearly the two modes, then you can make up your own. It's fine. You can do what you like, you know. So two main ways of using our mind. Okay. So the first one, strictly speaking, isn't even meditation. Using this definition to familiarize, it's a preliminary technique, and it's to train. You're training your mind to concentrate. You're training your mind to concentrate. You're training your mind to concentrate. That's what the first method is. It's called, the goal of that, the name in Sanskrit is shamatha. You've accomplished this certain level of single-pointed concentration. You know, the Indians invented it well before the Buddha. And the goal of it is to get this level, there's levels beyond that. It's a level of samadhi, concentration. Well, now it happens to be, and Lama in his book describes some of the qualities you'd accomplish, having accomplished this samadhi, and it's mind-boggling, you know. It's like, it sounds like science fiction to us. Because it's the view, the fundamental idea in Buddhism about the mind, again, coming from these Hindus, they're the ones that first Buddha went in that system and then went in his own direction. The idea of the mind is radically, radically different from our thinking, from the view we have in neuroscience and psychology. So before we talk even about meditation, let's just remember these points, you know, because this is not what we're talking about here. The mind is not physical. It depends upon a brain, but it's not itself as a brain. It has, and this is the point here, much subtler levels of cognition. The job of your mind is to cognize, and this is very This is central to this technique and to the whole approach in Buddhism, actually. Its job is to cognize or to be aware or to know. These verbs are synonymous. Use of different frameworks. The job of the mind is to know. So, of course, the obvious question is to know what, Buddha? And this is the point about the entire Buddhist path, to know that which exists, to cognize that which exists, which sounds pretty curious, you know, quite abstract. What do you mean, that which exists? Well, this is exactly the definition of what the mind is. Its job is to cognize that which exists. And why would Buddha's, and this is the point, well, why would Buddha want us to do that? Why does he want us to train our mind in this concentration so we can finally get to be in sync with that which exists? Because he says, right, we are living in La La Land right now in relation to that which exists. We're cognizing phenomena that don't exist. This is the job of all the neuroses in the mind, the delusions. So if we look at the model of the mind, Buddha's model of the mind, we've got a bunch of deluded, ridiculous, emotional afflictions, as they call them, that at their root are misconceptions, that cognize phenomena, cognize things and not the way they exist. As Lama Yeshe says, these, you know, what our mind does, having these delusions, not being free of these delusions, because we're all in samsara. What Buddha means by being in samsara is being caught up in these states of mind and that misrepresent the world back to us. It's a very curious way to put it, but this is the Buddhist way of talking. So as Lama Yeshe says, these delusions in the mind, well, that air is lovely. Everyone's getting some? Give everybody some air, not just me. Can it whiz around? You give everybody some air, that's nice. This mind of ours, okay, right now, being suffering sentient beings, being caught up in samsara, up and down like yo-yos, miserable, happy, miserable 1 minute, happy the next, and don't know quite where happiness is, not quite sure what causes suffering, or blah, 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 you know. Buddha says the reason is because what's in our mind. And these are the misconceptions in our mind, these emotional afflictions, or even these conceptions about how things exist at all sorts of ways. But Lama Zopa says what these states of mind do is decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. This is such a delicious way of putting what these delusions do. So they are part of our mind and they cognize, but they're cognizing things wrongly. This is a really curious thing initially, but when we can get this point that Buddha's making about why we suffer, because this is his point, we suffer because of these neurotic states of mind that misconceive things, that decorate on top of what is there, characteristics that aren't there. So it leads us up garden paths. We're living in La La Land, all these words, whatever you like. So the job, the essential job, apart from compassion, that's all part of it. A bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So the wisdom wing is all the nuts and bolts of sorting your mind out. So we can get it to the point by removing the neuroses one step at a time. And so that gets to the point where the mind is now in sync with reality. And then you can add compassion to that mix, and that's what a Buddha is. So oddly, interestingly enough, too, in our world, we would say the mind is sort of dealing about the mind. Neuroscience, not, but psychiatry is sort of like the lowest of the totem pole, on the totem pole, I think, of all the sciences. Neuroscience is the top one because it's hard. We like hard sciences, you know. We don't trust the subjective mind at all. Whereas for the Buddha, it's exactly the opposite. The mind, our capacity for cognition, which is not physical, which is not the brain, depends upon the brain, certainly at a gross level, but which has much subtler levels of cognition that these genius Indians discovered with this brilliant technique called shamatha, this training to concentrate, which is the first mode of meditation, technically it's not even becoming familiar, it's a training to get the mind to become super subtle, super clear, super stable, so that it can then do the job in the second mode of meditation to familiarize itself with how things exist. Insight meditation. So when we think about suffering, it never occurs to us that we suffer because it's something in our mind. Unless, of course, you're called psychotic, unless you're called some serious disease in the West that we call something, then you're suffering because of your mind. But the Buddha says we all suffer because of the mind, whether you're labeled it or not. having anything like attachment and anger and fears and jealousy and depression, they're all the mental illnesses that Buddha talks about. We don't call them mental illnesses, we just call them normal. For the Buddha, everyone's mentally ill. I'm not being sarcastic or even joking when I say that. Buddha's view is more radical, both the level to which we can develop our brilliant mind and the level of subtlety of this suffering that we all have. We only think a person's suffering mentally if they've got the labels we have in the West, that really make them out of their brains. But we're all, as long as we've got any attachments, anger, depression, jealousy, low self-esteem, all the stuff that we know is just part of life, that we think is normal, and what we mean by that is that you'd be abnormal if you didn't have them. Buddha's whole deal is, these are mental illnesses, these are suffering, these are delusions that exaggerate, that misrepresent the world back to us, which is why we suffer. When we can get this point, we're really on track with how Buddha talks, actually. It's very fascinating. So the first mode of meditation, concentration, you can call it. The world vaguely uses the term mindfulness, coming roughly from this technique. 47 varieties of it. It's learning to concentrate, which is very curious because you think, well, what happened there? Was that my mala that went flying? I heard it. No, it wasn't. Okay. It sounds curious to us, that it's training. You got to train your mind, but that's exactly what you're trying to do. But you've got to ask the question, it's very obvious, why would you want concentration? Well, the commonest view we have of meditation is that it kind of makes you feel better or something. It makes the pain go away, That's why we learn to meditate. We heard that it makes you feel better or something. We're very vague about it. We know the pain's pretty horrible sometimes. So it sounds pretty tasty. Meditate and you get rid of it. But it's not like that, The reason you concentrate is so that your mind be stable enough to do the job in the second mode of meditation of unpacking and unraveling, and in your daily life, actually, unpacking and unraveling these layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle misconceptions. So Lama talks some of the qualities that you'd have, some of the kind of the bonuses, the experiences you would have if you got some level, or especially if you did accomplish samadhi, accomplish shamatha. The Lamas over and over discuss it, They give you all the technical steps in it. But they don't tell you the way, some of the good things that come. And so you can be forgiven for thinking you've become a Buddha if you have some of these experiences. They're quite astonishing. And of course, nothing like this is remotely posited in our modern view of the mind. I mean, the mind is an astonishing, extraordinary thing. The Buddha's knowledge about it is unbelievable, And we're not discussing neuroscience. That's not Buddha's expertise. It's the subjective, cognitive process itself. So we can see right now that our mind is chaotic, isn't it? When you wake up in the morning, and as soon as you open your eyes, you can see it starts, isn't it? Chat, chat, chat. Constant, unceasing. So far, so many thoughts, just constant chaos. Even when it's quiet, it's chaotic. And the trouble is we only pay attention to it when it starts to become a bit more kind of dynamic and shouting and yelling. Then it becomes very painful. And we don't seem to have any control over it. We don't think it's possible to control it. So all Buddha's telling us is you can. But don't hold your breath. To do this job of accomplishing this first mode, even some level of concentration, you need very, very specific conditions. It talks about it in the teachings, You need, unless you come into this life extremely advanced from previous spiritual practice, it is an impossibility to get it in daily life, in between washing the dishes and taking care of your children. You need really specific conditions, both internally and externally. So internally, already you almost have to be a highly evolved being just to be ready to go and get it up in the mountains. And then when you are steady with no attachment, it doesn't make it, you've given up most of the strong cravings and desires. You have no interest in boys and mortgages and pets and food and all the normal dramas of life. You couldn't care less. You're able to go and live as a monk or a nun, go to the mountains for several years. Then you'll get shamatha. So 99% of us won't do that. But it doesn't mean we can't try the technique. Concentration doesn't mean we can't try, because there's always some benefit. But the long-term result is pretty astonishing. And Lama, in his incredible kindness, when he first met Westerners back in the 70s, saw these self-pity hippies, all of us, Western people, human beings. He tried to lift us, all the time tried to lift us, tried to be positive, tried to show optimistic, When you heard Lama Zopa teaching, you wanted to just go kill yourself. It sounded so depressing. Do you understand? But then Lama would come along and say, everything good enough, dear, and he'd lift you, all the time talking about our potential, trying to lift us to get some kind of sense of self-respect and contentment. So kind. So Lama describes in this book, and we'll read it out together a little bit. It's astonishing. It's like insane. It seems impossible. It seems like science fiction that you could accomplish such states in your mind by accomplishing single point of concentration. And these Indians, and I always quote, His Holiness said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. We don't think that in our culture, of course. We thought we did it, Mr. Freud or somebody. So Buddha went as far as he could go in that system, and then diverged in his own direction because he felt they hadn't gone far enough in removing from the mind the misconceptions in order to cognize reality, in order to become an enlightened being. So these two modes of meditation, simply speaking, the first is to get some focus. And to the degree that you have any focus, you then go to the second mode and you do the different, in the typical method, the typical methodology, not Mahamudra, you would have been studying your teachings. You would have been listening about the teachings about impermanence, listening to the teachings about karma, listening to the teachings about bodhicitta, listening to the teachings about the six perfections, about emptiness, about all this entire body of knowledge that we call Buddhism, that we see in books, read about, think about, hear about. The Buddhist view of the world, basically. It's a worldview. It's a worldview. It's a view of how the world exists according to the Buddha's observation. That's the point. And why would we want to be, why is he telling us his view of the world? Because he says this is what he's observed to be true. And he's telling us that being in sync with this reality is the source of happiness. Because right now we're living in La La Land in relation to reality. So this is the point, So there are these emotional afflictions, as they call them, attachment, anger, jealousy, that are intensely emotional, but that are rooted in being misconceptions. And then there are the other sort of like literally philosophical views. The Buddha would be arguing with the previous views that there's some intrinsic, permanent, uncaused essence called self. The Christians would call it a soul. The other argument, the Buddhist philosophical view the Buddha has that he found this fault with, was that there is some permanent, uncaused essence called the Creator, God. Not for the Buddha. Not for the Buddha. So he's got these views of the world from his own perspective, from his own observation. And this is reality, he says. I mean, everyone's allowed to tell you what they think is real. They're allowed to do that. But they should back it up with their findings, shouldn't they? They should back it up with their proof. But our trouble is when it comes to spiritual, we think I'm allowed to believe what I like, we say. We can make up what we want, or we can pick and choose, and then we pop it into our little belief bag, and we say, I believe in this, and I believe in that. We talk like that, don't we? About spiritual things. Buddha doesn't talk like that. So discover our true nature. What does Lama mean by that? all the teachings from the conventional point of view is Buddha's presentation of reality. You know yourself if you look at this Lamrim business, this packaging of the teachings, the Tibetan packaging. You start with, Buddha, so it's presenting the way things exist. So one whole piece right at the beginning is how things are impermanent. This is a massive philosophical view, actually, because it's arguing with the views before that, the Hindu views, that there is something unchanging, uncaused, not viable for the Buddha. So there's huge, massive teachings on how things are impermanent at a grosser level and at a more subtle level. Huge part of our practice. That's one of his views about reality, and we have to come in touch with that. Then we know Buddha's got this view about karma, this massive view of the law of karma, this natural law that runs the universe, the natural law within which the universe runs. Buddha didn't make it up. He's not a creator, doesn't posit such a thing. He's observed it. This is a huge one. This is the whole Buddhist view. I always say this, the whole Buddhist view about the universe, which is quite within itself internally coherent view of the universe. If we can prove that the law of karma doesn't exist and it's a mistake, Buddhism was mistaken, then the whole of the rest of Buddhism would collapse into a heap of incoherent nonsense, because karma is a fundamental point. Many people are Buddhist, many countries that are Buddhism don't have any interest in karma, That's fine, but I'm just saying, from the perspective of the entire way the world is, and certainly the Tibetan approach, is that abiding by the laws of karma, understanding how it works, is absolutely fundamental to the whole view and fundamental to practice. It's a natural law, runs the universe. The universe runs within this law. Like what's called a garden runs within the law of botany. The law of botany runs gardens. It's not as if some person, sort of like a boss, telling the things to do. It's just the name we give to the process called gardens, how they work. No one made it up. People have observed it. That's what Buddha means by natural law. Karma is a natural law. So in all the earlier stages of practice, we learn all this. We listen to impermanence, we apply it experientially, we abide by the laws of karma, we apply it experientially. We then go to the next stages, we start to look into our mind and look at all the afflictions, see how they cause us pain and wish to give them up. So this is process we go through as Buddhists if we choose to practice. Then we move into the compassion wing and we start to cultivate love, compassion that culminates in bodhicitta, this outrageous level of mind that Buddha says we can accomplish, such that now, when we've got it, only others are important. It's like bodhicitta is not equivalent of compassion. It's the culmination of compassion. Extraordinary capacity we have for this empathy for others. Then the final stages, then we deal with the wisdom side, the ultimate. This is all the conventional, and then it leads us to the final one, where we start to get concentration and then meditate on emptiness. That's the words, So as Lama presents in this book, there are two main ways of using meditation in order to get in touch with our true nature, emptiness. And the first one, which is the way we study in daily life, typical, is the way he studied in the monasteries, as he said. And that method is you learn the theory of something, and then you go and get some experience of it based on having internalized the theory. These are my words. So in terms of meditation, that means you get you listen to the teachings on everything, but here particularly emptiness. You listen to the teachings, you think, which is all the theories, it's intellectual, conceptual, and then you go sit on your cushion, and then you begin first getting some concentration, and then in the second mode of meditation, you would work through it. And this is what's called analytical meditation. It's the method in all the practices that we're so familiar with. It's the method for getting insight. So the first so that you listen to the teachings, you go sit on your cushion, and then you get some concentration, and then you listen, you go through the things you've learned conceptually, but because you're doing it in meditation, supposedly your mind's slightly more subtle, then it will trigger a kind of aha moment. Oh, I get it, you know. And then you repeat that process until eventually the aha moments are permanent. You just now have experienced the truth of it. That's the typical way we learn everything. Music, cooking, think about it. You learn the theory, you think it through, and you get the experience at the piano. You get the experience by making the cake. You go home you listen to your math, you come home, you squeeze your brain, think it through until eventually it's experiential. That's exactly how we learn everything. Well, this is the first method here that Panchen Lama mentions, which is, as Lama said, that's how he learned in the monasteries, you know. So specifically into relation to emptiness, you learn all the theories that you're using to prove emptiness, like dependent arising, for example. You'd learn all that, squeeze your brain, you debate on it, then you sit on your cushion and go to meditation and attempt to familiarize your mind with it in a very structured, organized, conceptual way. You'd think it through. That's what they mean by analytical meditation. You think it through very coherently, which would bring more power because you supposedly got some concentration. And then that was what triggers insight. Insight's like an aha moment, you know. And you keep doing, keep going until eventually you get a direct non-conceptual insight into emptiness. This is the method. So Mahamudra is they say it's the opposite approach. You go straight to meditation. No listening to theory. Straight to meditation. And we're going to discuss this method. So first of all, when me teaching this is really a bit sort of rude, because even when Lama taught, he always talks very simply. He's so kind. He always teaches the proper way, you know. I have to talk. So he taught the 4 preliminary practices, you know. I have to do this, he said, even though he does it like a few minutes, which means I should as well, but I'm not qualified. So I just have to think of it. Just think of it as me just kind of sharing Lama's teachings with you, okay? So first we would take refuge, and we'd do some purification with Bodhisattva, we'd do some Guru Yoga practice, and we'd think about bodhicitta, you know, preliminaries. So that we could hear that, but it doesn't quite make sense to us. What do you mean go straight to meditation? So the first one is you learn about the theories about emptiness. You squeeze your brain, listen, debate, study, which you need to do because it's pretty intense. Then in your meditation, you begin to taste it. But Mahamudra is the opposite. You go straight to meditation. So it sounds nice. And many people, when they talk about Dzogchen or Mahamudra, and Lama says, no theory, no dogma, no this, no that, just meditate. Sounds delicious, you know. Oh, I don't have to squeeze my brain. How wonderful. Well, listen to this. This is my feeling. And then you understand my point. That Mahamudra sounds simple, technically, to sit down and meditate. But listen to this. If you take music, I always take the example of learning Bach, this complicated, brilliant musician, you know, who wrote all this complicated theoretical music that can be experienced on the piano. So the first method is you go learn the theories. And then you learn all the arpeggios and the scales, and you study and study and study. And I mean, talk about familiarize your mind, unbelievable. Then you put, and then you go away and put your hands on the piano and you try to practice it. So the more theory you have, the more you practice. The more theory you have, the more complicated and the more brilliant you are on the piano. We get that. So Mahamudra approach to Bach would be, no, don't listen to any theories, go straight to the piano and intuit Bach. That shows how difficult Mahamudra is actually in order to get an experience. So it implies, I mean, that implies a total genius, you know. So of course, from the Buddhist perspective, that implies the person must have come into this life having practiced it in the past. I mean, I look on YouTube and I see these little children, you know, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, playing Bach. You can't believe your eyes. It's like people have photoshopped YouTube. You don't believe what you're seeing. And of course, in our culture, there is zero explanation for how come a 3-year-old little boy, this one little Russian boy, you know, must be 12 by now. I remember playing his music over the phone to a friend of mine who's in Guatemala, who's a composer. He heard a mature adult playing the piano, and he was 6, this little boy. You know. So it's hard to, it's hard, we just go, wow, wow, we can't believe, well, there's not a single explanation. And you can't find an explanation in the materialist philosophical view of your mind being the brain and you being made by your mummy and daddy. It's not a possibility. So, I mean, you can also talk about a gift from God. That's a possibility if you have faith in a creator. But of course, the Buddhist view is obvious because we come programmed into this life with our own past tendencies, whether you're a psychopath or a saint, you know, or a musician. It's the only way to explain it for me, at least theoretically. That this little boy is so familiar with music. You know, he's just able just to hop on the piano again and just, it's all there. It's all there. It's all there. You know. That's how meditators are. There's a friend of mine, one of our fellow students, little boy, and the world, she's, you know, she's a kind of maniac little boy, super intelligent, super berserk, super intelligent. You can see, you know. So the psychiatrist saying something about his, you know, mentally ill, and one of his words they use, you know, autistic or something. And she was worried about him. I said, for God's sake, go to Lama Zopa, ask what he thinks. So I gave him all these mantras, just, you know, things to practice. I mean, this is a little person, right? Mantras to remember, prayers to recite. Little boy. And then I said, why don't you send a photo of him to Tibetan doctors? Tibetan doctors know the mind as well as the body. They're an extraordinary system, you know, very integrated. I said, send a photo of little boy to one of these doctors and just give a couple of symptoms. And the doctor wrote back and said, yes, that's how yogis behave. You understand? Brought his stuff with him. And this is the view of karma. I mean, just frankly, I find that the most delicious view I've ever heard. It's easy to imagine it. I can't prove it yet. I'm not clairvoyant. But I can't think of a better explanation for why a child can play the piano at the age of 3 or another child delights in torturing. We don't like to hear that, because we assume all children are innocent. It's beyond naive. Hitler was a baby once. Where do you think he got this from? His mum? You're going to blame Hitler's mum? Excuse me. He brought it with him. Anyway, that's the Buddhist view. That's karma. So Mahamudra's advanced, actually. But Lama wanted us to try and get a taste. Lama wanted us to go beyond the intellect to try to get a taste. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know. It's okay. I think tonight we'll just talk about the mind, the 2 kinds of meditation, background a bit. So your mind's not physical. Your mind doesn't come from mummy or daddy. Your mind's not a function of the brain. Your mind didn't begin in your mother's womb, and your mind doesn't come from a creator. No views like that in Buddhism. So your mind is its own entity. You can track it back. It's a chain of mental moments, back, before this birth, previous birth, like that. That's the Buddha's view. This is the view of karma. It's been around for 3,000 years. Just we're not familiar with it. That's all, you know. But it's just in the bone. I mean, Tibetans has been in their bones, in their brains for 1,200 years. It's just they take it as a given. It's their view of the reality. Like materialism is our view of reality, you know. It totally informs their practice. Consciousness, mind. And when you hear, I'm going to say it here purposely, what your mind would be like when you have rid the mind of the rubbish and developed the mind to perfection, which is exactly what Buddha is saying we can do. That's the etymology of the word Buddha. Bud implies the utter eradication, I'm being very precise here, of all the neuroses, all the fears, all the dramas, all the misconceptions, all the rubbish, the stuff that we're so familiar with, you know, which already itself is a bizarre concept. To think that you can get rid of it altogether. You go to a neuroscientist and say that, and he'll laugh at you. You're asking him to cut out pieces of the brain, basically, because that's all he's talking about. So it's a very bizarre concept in modern psychology to consider the possibility that you can remove, remove utterly all nonsense, all fears, all ego, all misconceptions. We have nothing like that. So we have to, if we hear Buddha say this is his view, we better know what he means by that, you know, especially if we're trying to practice Buddhism. So if Buddha implies already the eradication of all of that, that's the wisdom wing, if you like. Then the compassion wing is the development. Buddha is the development to perfection of everything else: love, wisdom, compassion, empathy, patience, generosity, blah blah blah, all the good stuff, all the good stuff. This is the Buddha's view. I mean, it's seemingly very simple, the concept. But let me tell you what your mind would be like if you'd accomplish that. This is even more science fiction. And all it's showing is the level to which Buddha's view shows how astonishing mind is, consciousness. And every one of us possesses this potential to be Buddha. So when you've accomplished Buddhahood, your consciousness, which is anyway not physical, so therefore can't anyway be confined by space or time or matter. Our mind is stuck in this body right now because of delusions, because intense attachment to our sense of me and this bag of bones, you know. So our mind is incredibly narrow, incredibly restricted, incredibly tiny. We can't see past our own nose. So when you've fully developed your mind, it is anyway not physical. So anyway, can't be finally confined by space or time or matter. So therefore you can say quite literally, your mind, your consciousness pervades wherever there is existence. It can't not. I used to love that idea as a Catholic. God was everywhere. I used to think about that. I like that idea. Same idea, except they call it God. Buddha calls it Buddha, and we've all got the potential. The second quality you'd have is that you would cognize that which exists, which is the best we can do is just hear those words. We can't get that. That particularly means we can cognize the minds of all other beings, all their past, all their future, all their karma. Whatever, by definition, that which exists is that which can be cognized by mind. That's axiomatic for the Buddha. One of the definitions of that which exists in Buddhism, there's several synonyms you use for phenomena or object of knowledge, existent. There's several terms used for whatever exists. And the definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. So it's axiomatic that that which mind cognizes, a valid cognition, is that which exists. And so that which exists is defined by minds being able to cognize them. So when your mind is enlightened, fully developed, it cognizes that which exists, including all the minds of all the sentient beings of the universe, and there are countless of them. This already is insanity to think possibility. This is possibility. Not only that, because you cut all nonsense from the mind, there's no longer a separate sense of self. You've got this mind that's infinite, infinite, infinite compassion, empathy for all beings, as if they were you. No sense of separateness, not possible. Infinite compassion, infinite empathy, infinite love and affection, just naturally, for all those minds, all those beings whose minds you see perfectly. And not only that, when you're fully developed as a Buddha, you have the three essential qualities: wisdom, compassion, and power, they call it. I gave a talk at the Catholic University in Melbourne years ago, because I'm a Catholic, and I come from Melbourne, and they asked me to give a talk. And I didn't know what to talk about. And I looked at the dictionary the morning of my talk. I had a 20-minute slot. I didn't know what to talk about. And I looked up the dictionary, the definition of God. And it said three essential qualities: wisdom, compassion, and power. I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. They're the same definitions of a Buddha. Except the Christians say that he's a creator, and there's only one of them, and he makes the rest of us. But the Buddha says everybody's got that potential. So I always say this, and I like this, that humans over the years, you know, looking at the meaning of life, wherever you go, humans everywhere, coming up with many similar findings, but different explanations, you know, clearly different explanations. So anyway, I thought I'd give, oh, good. So I gave, the talk was the similarities between the definition of God and Buddha. I don't know if they liked it, but that's what it was. So then you think about your mind now, okay? What do you think? It's your brain or in your toenail? I don't care. But your capacity for cognition, think about it. First, we're overwhelmed by our nutty thoughts, aren't we? Depressed, anxious, I'm no good, I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm not good, I'm not fulfilled, no one loves me. I mean, you know what I'm saying. I never yet met a person who says, Robina, I can't stop thinking good thoughts. Never, ever yet, not yet. Bodhisattvas would, but they wouldn't tell you. So we know this. We know that we can't retain much in our minds. You know, we can't learn. We look at sort of complicated things, and those are impossible for us to squeeze our brain for several years. It seems very limited what we can cognize, what we know. You know, we're overwhelmed by need to sleep and eat, spend 2/3 of our life in sleep, or 1/3 or whatever. We don't remember most things. We talk about not remembering a past life. What a joke. If you had to account for every second of your thoughts and actions today, you'd be a total, utter failure. Super intelligent people even can't remember most things we've thought or said or done today. So we just say, that's normal. Yeah, that's a normal, deluded, samsaric person. Buddha agrees. But he has found methods to become this other one. I mean, most people aren't Buddhists because they want to become that one. It seems like too ridiculous. Most of us hopefully will get a bit less miserable. It's about the best we can think, isn't it? But this is what Buddha's view is. This is the potential of every mind. Every being, every dog, every monkey, every ant, every human has this potential just by definition. By definition, having a mind, being a mind haver, a mind possessor. The term in Tibetan is so delicious that we could translate as sentient being. A mind possessor, semchen. Oh, that's such a better term, I think. Well, Buddha would say there are trillions of mind possessors in all realms of suffering and happiness, all creating our own happiness, all creating our own suffering, and not knowing we're creating our own suffering and knowing that we could create our own happiness, all kind of lost, you know, caught up in misery, blaming everybody else, limited, a profound limited sense of self. I mean, like pinhead big sense of self, sense of our potential. It's a way to go. You know? So Lama, in such kindness, we always try to encourage and speak down to earth and keep it simple and make it tasty and experiential. For example, tantric teachings, they're super advanced necessarily. You know, you don't study those for years. Once you're stable in all your earlier practice, you then are ready for it. Lama was able to extract the essence of it psychologically, and especially the essence of the tantric approach of more identifying with your positive. One simple way of putting tantric psychology is identifying more with your positive qualities than your miserable ones. The first stages of practice, we all know, are digging deep into the shit of your own mind. As a friend of mine said, as a therapist, it's putting your hands in your own shit. It's a good way to put it. Dealing with your dramas and your misery, learning to be disciplined, learning not to harm others, learning to, you know, purify, do your vows. It's exhausting, hard work. We know that. The idea being, of course, that we can subdue our body, speech, and mind, start getting some contentment and fulfillment, and then we're ready to go to the compassion wing, and now we're ready to go to Tantra. We start to enhance our marvelous qualities. Well, Lama tried to get us to do this from day one, you know, and he had it. He said somehow modern people are so deluded we could understand it. This concept of transformation. He's so kind, you know, so incredibly kind. And I remember I was overwhelmed by Lama. I mean, all the teachings, I didn't have a clue at all, but Lama Yeshe, every time I heard him talk, it lifted me. So he succeeded. You know. You felt it was possible. When you heard him talk, you felt it was possible. Unique encouragement. So our mind is not physical. Not coming from mummy or daddy or a creator. No such concept for them. It's beginningless and endless, and has this incredible potential. For what? For happiness, basically. But that even more simply, forget Buddhahood, okay? Just the wisdom wing alone is mind-boggling in terms of our potential. And the simplest way to put it is potential for happiness, for joy, contentment, fulfillment, and being rid of the opposite. It's the simplest way to put it. Now, that's encouraging. To become a Buddha sounds a bit ridiculous, you know, like too much. This one, oh, I'd like that, please. I want happiness. I want to be free of misery and low self-esteem and depression. That level, absolutely that one. We know that one. So that's encouraging. And basically the wisdom wing, which is the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's telling us that. He doesn't say it so bluntly, I found a method how to get happy, babes. He's not saying that. He is effectively, but he's first saying, I found a method to stop suffering. Which means a method to get happy. We get so overwhelmed by the suffering we forget, you know. Because, another way to put it, and this is even if you just take the shamatha technique, what it's showing us is the mind, just that alone, forget the Buddhahood potential, the mind has this astonishing potential for joy. This is so astonishing to us, so extraordinary, so weird. What do you mean potential for joy? You know, we can't get that. That's what they're saying. But for me, hearing that and reading the words and trying to see the coherence of it is very encouraging. That's what Lama tried to encourage us. So we've got this potential to be happy and content and fulfilled. And therefore, of course, loving and compassionate and empathetic, you know. That's very encouraging. Yeah. Right. Oh, it's way down on my chest. Yeah, I'm so sorry. It fell down. Over here, the other side. But it goes into my clothing if I do that. It's no good at all. Because it goes down that way. It's facing this way, you see. Was put up here. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Sorry. You must tell me again.
While we have a pause. Your chair is very near the back.
I know it is, but it's all right.
Okay.
I know.
Okay,
I
as
put
long
it
as you're in
there.
control.
I did. I
don't
put
want to
it.
see you falling
No, I
back.
know. I know. I'm a bit dangerous. I went close to the edge. I agree. But it's a fairly stable chair, and I'm not bouncing much. I needed the place for my cushion and my feet, you see. Now, I did notice, David, and I was thinking I best not make people nervous. Now, one time I did fall. Oh, I think it was Sweden or somewhere. It was beyond hilarious. You know, it was like a complete comedy. Legs in the air, chair went back. You know, people nearly fainted they fainted. I didn't. People who just saw it, you know, got such shock. So I went for my legs up, I promise. So listen, I'm just chatting away here, a little bit background. I would like you to now ask me some questions, please, on what we've discussed. Nothing more. If you'd like to, please. I'd love something, anything. Something on Zoom, people on Zoom. Nothing, really? Anything at all you'd like to ask? Hmm? Somebody online? Yes, good. Okay, Sean, go. Talk to me.
So you mentioned that the Mahamudra teaching is you're going straight into the meditation and not worrying about the theory. Is it similar to the Zen?
You could, exactly. You could argue they're all coming from the same idea. Absolutely, yes.
And Kensho,
I don't think it's the same technique, but the same concept is there. Go beyond. Yes, don't get caught up in conceptuality. Go to the nature of mind. Dzogchen, the Zen has come out of that. I think certainly the Mahamudra one too. It's a very,
the Kensho experience is like. I beg your pardon? The Kensho experience or Satori is.
I can't hear those words. If you can you get? Let me see the rest of your face. I only see your eyes and your nose. That's better. Say it again.
So the Satori experience or the Kensho experience they mention in when you do Zazen, is that like the insight that
I cannot possibly say that it's the same because I've not studied that, but I'm saying it seems like a similar approach. That's the best I can say. Definitely that. Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Exactly. Who else? Somebody, please. Nothing. No other questions. Okay. So I think I wanted to talk a bit more about that, really. Just this idea that Lama always would stress that for me was such an eye-opener. Because when we sort of, so we do hear, generally speaking in the West, that meditation is meant to make you feel better or something. I don't know quite what people think, but different views, certainly. But okay, let's talk about them. So what does it do? What is, in this concentration technique, forget anything else, just the concentration technique. What is the benefit of it? This is the thing, Well, first of all, here we have a mind that's uncontrolled. That will agree. Thoughts are uncontrolled. And when they get to the level of being emotional, then they're completely uncontrolled. We're like driven. There's nothing's going to stop us. Once you start, on that, once the emotion, once the thoughts and the anger, the hurt rises to the surface, then it's like you're lost, isn't it? We know that. We know that. So what Buddha's saying is we can learn to have control. We can learn to be in charge of our minds, one way of putting it. That sounds very delicious. We would love that, surely. But the thing is, it's going to take a while. That's the point. And that's where we're a bit impatient. So if you think about this, so then one of the misconceptions is when the emotion is so intense, we can meditate. And some people do experience quite pleasant feelings, You can sit there because you're trying to be quiet, and suddenly the mind can go a bit quiet. And some people can feel very, very nice. There's no doubt about that. And that's a little bonus, but that's not the goal. That's not the goal, okay? Long-term goal, of course, of this first technique, single-pointed concentration, the goal is to access this subtler level of cognition that we don't even posit as existing. The best we can do is think about it, can't imagine it. That's utterly beyond your conceptuality and utterly beyond the sensory. Well, if you've gone beyond sensory and conceptual, you're snoring fast asleep. So we can't imagine how you can be awake at a subtle level. But that's the point. That's the brilliance of this technique invented by these Indians, well before the Buddha. They discovered this brilliant technique. So to get the mind to that level seriously, continuously, effortless, that's what takes years. The really brilliant completely qualified people can maybe take 6 months, they talk about. I mean, there are many of our colleagues, Western people like us, educated like us, who spend 30 years in meditation, gradually getting not just that technique, but even that technique. There's many other ways of meditating in retreat, of course there are. But so the point is, and Lama makes it super clear here, in order to realize in the second method, whether it's in the first system, which is where you do the theory first and then meditation, or this one where you do meditation and then understand things, to get the mind to unpack and unravel all the nonsense, especially about the true nature of our own self. The term is therefore the emptiness of the mind, which is the non-inherent existence of the mind, which of course is for most of us so abstract. To totally experientially cognize that, it is impossible until you have got single point of concentration. It is impossible. Very simple, because I like to use the example of a microscope. There are certain things you know you can't see unless you've got a microscope. Well, there are certain things in your mind you can't get to unless you've cultivated the microscope of your mind, which is how I talk, using that analogy, for when you get single point of concentration. You've accessed the subtler level of your mind. You've completely subdued the grosser level. You can't possibly realize emptiness, Lama says, unless you've got single point of concentration. That's the long term. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Everything's relative, everything's degrees, you know. But to finally cut the root of all suffering, and see for the first time nakedly that there never has been, isn't, and never could be the fantasy I that we think is there. So it's the subtlest point. It's the subtlest point. You've got to have single point of concentration to get there. So the degrees which we can cultivate mind, just from the first view, concentration is extraordinary. And it's nothing wrong with seeing some benefit, you know. So the way to talk about that, and this is something we have to understand with the Buddha's teachings, which is, again, not how we think. Buddha would say that every single being in the universe only wants happiness and doesn't want suffering. So let's look at those words. This is so precise in Buddha's teachings, and it's not, again, how we think. It's super, super important. The Buddha divides all the contents of our mind into 3 categories. You know? Those that are neurotic, I-based, fear-based, ego-based, delusional, distressing, miserable, disturbing, the source of our own pain, the source of our of living in la-la land, and the source of harming others. That lot. And he's found you can get rid of it, baby. It's not at the core of our being. This is his amazing point, you know. Second are the virtues. That's our saving grace. Like a miracle. We've got access to some love and compassion and kindness and generosity and forgiveness. This is a miracle. This is the source of our happiness. And this is the source of how come we can help others. The first lot are the source of our suffering and how can we harm others. It's really clear. If you look at the life, it's like this. Check the last time you were depressed. You don't go, wow, so depressed. No, it was just wonderful. We know it's horrible, and we know when you are depressed, you can't see past your own nose, and then you mightn't do too much to harm other people because you're so concerned about yourself, but you're not fun to be around, you know. If you say you feel loving and kind, you know it's nice. It's sort of no-brainer almost, you know. Buddha goes into these enormously, and really one way of saying the job of being a Buddhist is to distinguish between these 2 lots. This is it. Because Bud implies getting rid of the first lot, Da implies developing the second lot. So you better distinguish the difference, isn't it? That's the heart job of being a Buddhist, actually. Now, the third lot, what are they called? They call them neutral, but that's very misleading to us. But what it means is they're neither neurotic and delusional, nor are they virtuous, which seems weird because we don't talk about the mind like that. So we have to understand this from the Buddhist perspective. There's lots of these, I call them the mechanics of our mind. Intention, attention, concentration, good memory, discrimination, the parts of us that make us function, whether you're a murderer or a meditator. If you are a sniper, you need really good focus, really good concentration, really good mindfulness, really good discrimination. It's a fact. So they're not virtuous on their own. It's a question of what you do with them that makes them virtuous. That's why being mindful is not, Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. Don't get all caught up and excited. Could you sit there and be mindful? It's not in its nature virtue at all. It's not in its nature spiritual at all. It's your motivation for it that makes it spiritual. So this third category, what I'm getting to, and this is not how we think. So you've got to really hear it. It's very curious. There's one in there, and Buddha plucks it out and gives it great importance when he says about the 5 links, the 5 dependent, the 5 aggregates, and he gives it, and it's also in the 12 links. It's a very major state of mind. He calls it feeling, but not how we think, not like equivalent of emotion, not like that at all. And there's only 3 kinds of feeling that we can ever have: pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. From this perspective, forget the neutral, all right? So this is the point I'm getting to. We say the word happiness. We say the word suffering. When we say that, we literally think it's something out there, mostly something out there. When you tell me about your suffering, you're going to describe in detail your unkind boyfriend, how he cheated on you. You see him, you can feel him, you can see him, you describe the event. If you describe your happiness, you describe the event, the meal, the memory, like Apple tells you, create more memories. I give you your photos to put them into your, I mean, it's so gross anyway, I can't bear that. But we think of it in terms of the external event. This is very fascinating, actually. Think about it. Well, for Buddha, that's bizarre. Happiness is another word for happy feeling, pleasant feeling. So pleasant feeling, mildly pleasant, very, very pleasant, insanely delicious pleasant, or as Lama puts it, when you got shamatha, ecstasy, rapture. I mean, waiting for those. They're all on the spectrum of pleasant feelings. So they're in the mind, the mental consciousness, and the sensory consciousness. Happy feelings, happiness is experienced here. Yes, triggered by the delicious cake, triggered by the abusive boyfriend. But we think of it out there as the suffering itself. And not only that, we also think of it as the cause of suffering. So it's double trouble. We not only think that the cake is the happiness, but we think it's the cause of happiness. I mean, we're completely delusional, Buddha says. The cake, the best way to put it, cake for the Buddha is a catalyst for triggering here pleasant feelings. The mean boyfriend is the catalyst for triggering here unpleasant feelings. It's so important to understand this if you want to understand Buddha. Pleasant feelings. So we say pleasure. I mean, pleasure sounds like a sin. We don't like to say that, you know. Happiness sounds all right, but pleasure, well, it's not, a bit suspect. Understand? But this, this is what Lama's telling us in Mahamudra, which is in Buddha's teachings. The Hindus saw this. We have this potential for insane levels of bliss and pleasure. And everybody who meditates, who's got some kind of semblance of proper meditation, say, you just can come across, anybody here maybe, even just by accident, come across a nice pleasant feeling in meditation. But even these levels of ecstasy and rapture at the subtler level, they're peaceful. We know even the pleasure you get if you're really thirsty, just the pleasure that's triggered by that cool water, the mind's berserk. Because why? This is the point. Because it's dependent upon attachment. This is the essence of all Buddhist teachings, you know. So attachment is one of the main problems in the first category of states of mind. Attachment is this emotional hunger, this dissatisfaction, this neurotic, you know, desperate craving for things to be lovely, fragile, frantic, like a junkie, always only wants nice things, only wants what I want, can't handle problems, is manipulative, you know, controlling, manipulative, expectation, possessiveness, all of this, as well as berserk mind, what we call OCD, ADDD, ADHD, and all those different things that we've now invented. That's just your berserk mind of attachment, the mind out of control. So it's got these many facets to it, you know. Attachment. As Lama says, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. You'll never begin to understand it. and just start to dig deep inside. And of course, based on Buddha's view, because it's not what we think, you know. It's enormous, this attachment. So, right, so the whole path for Buddha is his gradual getting us, first of all, to control our body and speech. This is the lam rim, you know. First, he gets us to control our body and speech, our behavior. Why? Because it's driven by what's in the mind. So, you know, if you kill and steal and jump on the wrong partner and lie and eat 17 pieces of cake, what's it driven by? Not love and compassion, by attachment. Of course it is. Or aversion, or jealousy, or blah. So we've got to harness the servants of the mind first, calm the body and speech down first, which is already incredible spiritual practice. Live good, ethical life. Don't harm sentient beings. You know. Then we can get to the mind and start to unpack and unravel and identify attachment and start to calm it down. And then the anger when it doesn't get what it wants and so on and so forth. This is the path, you know. Meanwhile, we're trying to practice our meditation and everything. So as we progress along this way, controlling our body, speech, and mind, already that's helping us hugely get more deeply into our minds, you know, be our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it. So, okay, so concentration meditation is a method to try and control the mind, to try and it's a training. So the training is to stay on one thing. The way to help your mind concentrate is you concentrate on one thing. You pay attention, you know, you pay attention. And that's what's training. You're training to pay attention. You've got many parts in your mind, all in that neutral category, all in the mechanics category. So you've got part of the mind that is paying attention. That's one of the mental factors is always there. So you pay attention, you locate the sensation, and you're going to pay attention to the breath. Pay attention. So what's going to happen is your mind's berserk, all the chatting, isn't it? You've got other parts of your mind that are going to help you. So the main part, we will hear this word, mindfulness. It's not some state of mind. It's one of the many mechanical bits of your mind that enables you, that's catching you, watching. It's like watching the kid. The kid's attention. And mindfulness is watching, like a mum. And as soon as attention wanders off, gets distracted, mindfulness brings it back, you know. There's even another one called, what's it called? Another one, what's it called? Jeffrey Hopkins calls it a weird thing. Introspection, they call it. The other one is, what's it called? What did you say? Who said it? Vigilance. Yeah, that's it. Vigilance. Yes, exactly. Vigilance. Dalai Lama says it's like the policeman, kind of watching. Vigilance is watching, mindfulness and attention. And so all these bits do their job, you know. They're all doing their job. That's why it's so important. We say, I am watching my breath. Forget the I. There's no I in there anyway. It's just misleading you. Attention is paying attention. Mindfulness is trying to bring it back. Vigilance is trying to make sure that all the bits and pieces are doing well. So as you progress in your concentration, meditation, you know, you get a little bit longer staying on the object. And then eventually you perfect the mindfulness. You don't need to do that anymore. And then you perfect the vigilance. And by the time you get to that, you perfect concentration. So it's a gradual process. And using these bits and pieces, these mechanical bits of your mind, they're not virtues, but they're crucial. Try and calm the crazy mind down, to be able to focus on one thing. If you were to see a person in single point of concentration, fully developed, they'd look like they were dead. They've gone beyond their conceptual and their sensory. So what's the advantage of even a little tiny baby effort at this? We don't even get a fraction of concentration. Don't worry about it. It seems to me the biggest benefit for us at this, you know, first stages of practice, where our mind is just naturally berserk every day, the greatest benefit comes from consciously making the effort to stay on that object. The breath in this case, perhaps, or in this case, Mahamudra, on the mind itself. I'm going to go into that. On the mind itself. That's the unique characteristic of Mahamudra. The object of concentration is the mind itself. Means whatever pops up in your mind, you know. That's what you're focusing on. So, you know, the benefit of this is already we might not get any concentration this life. Don't worry about it. But the miracle of benefit is this, the way I like to put it, because you're stepping back, right? Most of the time we are absorbed in our mind, aren't we, like this? We can't see anything. We're just living kind of, there's no feeling of stepping back. There's no feeling of objectivity. It's always just chaos in there, especially when the strong emotions are coming. You're just drowning, you know. So this incredible effort we make, even for 5 minutes, to attempt to stay on one thing. Success or not, I don't care. Incredible already. And somehow you begin to get a bit of objectivity. So what's so interesting, the first of the 9 stages of concentration, which most of us won't get to even, I don't think, Pabonka Rinpoche says in the Nam Rim, a sign of success is that you think your mind's getting worse. Meaning you're paying attention, you're noticing your mind. So even though you're watching the breath, of course you can't help but notice the crazy thoughts. That's the benefit. That's the benefit. You don't follow them and sink into them and swim in them and be blind. You're hearing them. Like suddenly, you're hearing them, and that's the miracle. That's good. We think, oh, they should all go away. I'm not successful otherwise, It's so absurd. And why is it good? Because if the day-to-day job is to be able to distinguish between a delusion and a virtue in your meditation or in your day-to-day, that's your job. Then you've got to see them. If you're drowning in all your thoughts and feelings, unable to label any of them, completely convinced your boyfriend caused them all, feeling overwhelmed, self-pity, not fair, poor me, we're drowning. There's no awareness, there's no self-awareness at all. When you start to focus, that begins to grow. How amazing, But our tragedy is we think we're getting worse. We believe we are. Oh my God, I thought I'd be better by now. I'm getting worse. We're misinterpreting. We are truly misinterpreting. The thought, as Pabonka says, the thoughts have been there all the time. It's just that now you're noticing them. That's amazing. Because if your job is to be able to distinguish between the neuroses and the virtues, you have to see them, which means we have to learn to have some courage instead of wishing that all go away, unable to bear them, hating ourselves because we think we're creeps. We have to have courage to hear the jealous thoughts, hear the angry thoughts, hear the unhappy ones, hear the depressed thoughts, own them. Confront them, see them, identify them, and own them as yours. This is a huge part of the process of becoming self-aware. Then you can make decisions about them. But just thinking they all should go away, I can't stand them, it's horrible. And then when you do see them, you think you're worse. And we just, no matter how hard we try, no matter how hard we practice, we never think we're getting any better. And that is another function of attachment, primordial dissatisfaction. No matter how hard we work, how much we accomplish, it's never enough. This is our worst tragedy. So all this process of becoming self-aware and being happy to see our thoughts and able to identify them, this is one of the results of even beginning to start to watch your boring old breath. If you think it's just, oh, I'm not successful because they all haven't gone away, you're missing the point. I can't stress this enough. So we've got to develop courage to see them and hear them. They've been there for eons. But the big part of when you start to study the nature of mind, like Lama tells us in Mahamudra, we're going to discuss it tomorrow, Lama describes the nature of mind as pure in its nature, even conventionally. This is very encouraging. Then we've got some courage and we know the anger's there, the depression and the hopelessness and the rubbish and the pride and the rubbish, but we don't identify with it. Then we can really practice, I tell you. We can really grow up, becoming self-aware, knowing how to interpret what's in there. It's not your true nature. It's there, running the show right now, no problems. There is no argument, but it's not who we really are, and we can change. That's why so people are so excited about neuroscience, Neuroplasticity, as one Canadian scientist, I remember read, said, was the greatest finding of the 20th century. You're not stuck with the brain you're born with. Buddha's been telling us for 2,500 years we can do that. I find it very fascinating. I have to say, a person I know is very excited about the neuroscientific one, which is wonderful. But I said, what's the method? What's the method you use to change your brain? Listen to this. It's to change your thoughts. Well, that's all Buddha's been telling us for 2,500 years. But it's because we can see it in the brain, we think we've discovered it. But it's not as if you don't go in with a scalpel and change your brain, and then your thoughts change, do they? You change your thoughts first. Do you see what I'm saying? Well, that's what Buddha's telling us. But it somehow makes it more real for us that we can see the brain, I find that very fascinating, actually. Do you understand? I suppose we are so oriented towards the physical, it does give us courage, doesn't it? But you have to change your thoughts to get the brain to change. I find that very fascinating. You change your thoughts. That's the point. That's the point. That's Buddha's point. That's essentially his point. The brain's not, the thoughts aren't set in stone. That's his point. Even about impermanence, forget emptiness. Even about impermanence, forget emptiness. That's his point. Miracle. When we can know that, we can get courage. And then we'll be happy to hear all the garbage, roommates, I call them, my roommates. And that's the point. These delusions that we can recognize now, they're very gross, very, very gross level of delusions. But if you think about it, the process of practicing is that you're lessening the delusions, or if you like, you're getting to see more subtle levels of them, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle. And actually, they're not going to be completely gone until you realize emptiness. How can they possibly be? Therefore, we've got to learn to know the difference between the delusions and the virtues. This is the absolutely necessary job of being a Buddhist. And not seeing them clearly as different. And that demands incredible self-awareness, incredible capacity for introspection, incredible capacity to focus on the mind and hear, Then we're really practicing. Am I over my time already, am I? What time is it? What time is it, David?
25 past 7.
25 past, that's time to go home, right? Is it? Less than one. So I need some questions. Come on, please. Something. Just give me some questions. Any old thing. I don't care. Besides Shan. Somebody else. And we'll go into detail tomorrow. Talk about Lama. Nothing? Nobody? No questions? Yeah, good, sweetheart.
So Mahamudra is a Sanskrit word. It's not a Tibetan word for the same thing.
Sorry, I missed a bit. What you said. Grab the mic, darling. Grab the mic.
Then people can hear you on Zoom.
That's good. Go, sweetheart. Say it again. Go.
Yeah, shy.
I'm not being shy.
Go, darling.
Mahamudra is the Sanskrit word,
Yes.
and Dzogchen is the
Tibetan.
Tibetan word for exactly the same thing.
No, I think it's a different type. Same style, but different technique. Dzogchen means great perfection. I don't even know the Tibetan word for Mahamudra. Dzogchen means great perfection. It's a different technique, similar to each other, but different style. Yeah, but I don't even know the Tibetan word for Mahamudra, I must say. I don't know. They're similar style, definitely. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, sorry. So go, sweetheart, talk to me.
So I saw yesterday on internet somewhere that
Bit louder, sweetheart.
I saw on the internet yesterday that they've developed an embryo and a sperm from not humans or something, and they've put them together.
From what, darling?
There's an egg and a sperm, what they've managed to create,
Yeah.
but they've not come from a woman or a...
What are they from?
I don't know, but the point is, so if they're not from humans and they've merged them together, and then I'm thinking about artificial intelligence as well,
Yes,
separate
right,
to that.
exactly.
If you think about mind and consciousness,
Yes.
so could they become sentient beings?
I understand, darling. Okay, I understand. Well, I'll tell you the Vajrayana view of describing mind at grosser and more subtle levels and the components of a person, what they need to be there in order to be a living being. Okay. What's your name?
Mel. Melissa.
Mel. You say yourself Mel? Okay,
Yeah.
Mel, good. So Mel has got gross consciousness, which is her sensory consciousness, which is her mind, which is not physical, but depends upon the eyeball and the rest of the bits and pieces to have the five senses, okay? And so your sensory consciousness depends upon the body, doesn't it? So they go intimately together. You can't have eye consciousness without an eyeball.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand? It's not just the eyeball that sees. There's a part of your mind that kind of that goes off and functions through the eyeball, and you have a cognition of color and shape. That's your five sensory consciousnesses. So when you go through the death process, your body stops working, the senses cease, and that's what we think death is in our culture, don't we? Do you understand? That's just the beginning of the process. So now your subtler level of consciousness, which actually is your mental states, all your thoughts and your feelings and emotions, they are more subtle. And they are still existing at a subtler level, but it's not evident because your brain has stopped. But they don't depend upon the brain at the subtler level. simultaneously, but there is a subtler level of physicality. So this is a bit similar to the Chinese and the Ayurvedic system, the Chinese system, certainly the Tibetan medical system. They talk about how at a subtle level of your mind, you've got this subtle nervous system, 72,000 subtle channels coursing throughout your body, and coursing through all of those are these different wind energies or prana. We used to talk that way in our culture a few centuries ago, you know, winds and things. And this is the Indian style that they talk like this, and it's definitely the Tibetan medical one and the Vajrayana system. So these wind energies and our states of mind are inextricably linked. You can't possibly have like moments of anger or love or kindness without their particular wind energies being connected. So your Tibetan doctor will feel your pulses and feel the imbalance of certain winds, and she knows it's because your attachment's berserk. That's why you're having anxiety attacks. You understand? Another person, their anger will be berserk, so their winds are polluted. So they're intimately linked. The wind energy, which is your subtle physical, and the mind. So that's what mind is. You can't see the evidence of it. It's not a brain. It's a subtler level of cognition that is real, exists, and has to be linked to those wind energies. Then even more subtle, as you finally get to the final stages of death, what they call literally very subtle consciousness, the subtlest level of your consciousness, inextricably linked with this very subtle wind energy. And then that's what goes from life to life. Now, the question is, can that enter into a piece of metal or a piece, you know, like a robot? Can it enter into a robot? Well, you know, to be a human being, no. But a spirit, you could argue, a being in another realm of existence, very suffering, I'm just suggesting this, very suffering beings, spirit. They're hungry ghosts. They call them sometimes, they're like driven by attachment. They can, people who hear voices, literally one of these spirits has entered into that person. So I would feel if a spirit can enter into a human body, why not into a robot, you know? But we don't create the mind. That's the joke. From the Buddhist perspective, we think we're creating a mind.
No,
A mind comes from a previous mind. A mind has got its own continuity. You can't make a mind. That's the most bizarre concept in the universe for the Buddha.
And that's what I mean, because like you'd said earlier, what did you say? There were like 3 trillion sentient beings. Did you say that, or I just made that up?
Go on, whatever, go on.
Because you said there's like 3 trillion sentient beings all around or whatever, so they're not all humans, are they? So in some realm, or even in our realm now, is it going to be these artificial intelligence things?
So, can you hear the point I'm making?
Yeah, but I'm just.
But no, what is the point I'm making?
About the different.
No, yeah, but this artificial intelligence. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I'm just thinking about what they're trying to bring in future with these. So,
no, but what do you mean by artificial? What would it look like?
Not a human. Not a human.
What do people? But people think they can create a mind. They say that, don't they? So what's his egg and sperm got to do with it all? I don't understand your relationship to the egg and sperm and the AI.
A different. So it's not a human.
But this egg and sperm, you have to tell me more about it. What do you? It has to come from a human of some kind. Where did egg and sperm come from?
On the internet yesterday. I don't know. It just said they've developed an egg and they've developed.
What do you mean by developed?
Well, they've obviously put cells together. I don't know the in-depth, but
okay, so you don't know where those eggs and sperms came from.
They've said they're not from humans. They must have developed.
Go on and tell us, where are they from, these eggs and sperms? You've heard what she's reading. Tell me then.
They're talking about stem cells that they've created from, like, say, skin.
Oh, I see, anybody's and creating.
They've made a sperm from someone.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, I see.
And they can put those together and grow an embryo.
Okay, so good. Very simple.
Sorry,
no, that's fine, honey. So listen, that can be possible, but what has to enter into that egg and sperm is a consciousness.
Yeah, that's what
we think. The egg and sperm is the person. That's the difference. We think in the modern world that the egg and sperm, like Dolly, that sheep we created. They think, but no, a consciousness would have gone into Dolly's egg and sperm, and who is in Dolly might have been your mum from 5 lives ago.
Yeah.
We didn't create Dolly.
No.
That's what we think we're doing, and that's why we think we create with AI.
So that's what I was thinking. So can the consciousness?
I beg your pardon?
Can the consciousness end up into that embryo? What they've
Say
made?
it again.
Can consciousness?
Which consciousness?
From a past life.
Yeah, to do what?
Could it end up in one of those embryos?
Well, it's done it already. I mean, they've already got Dolly, that replica of some other sheep, and people want to make up their new dogs now. And Barbara Streisand got them to make a new dog of hers because she's attached to her dog, so they made a replica. So we think it's the same. All the egg and sperm is the physical component, but for it to become alive, a person, consciousness from before, which is a continuity of mental moments going back to some beginningless time, that consciousness has to go into that egg and sperm. So I'm suggesting if a conscious can go into a robot, maybe that's a spirit that's going into the robot. Do you understand? That's the best I can think of.
Right. Thanks.
We think we create the consciousness. That's the
Yeah.
point I'm trying to make.
Mm.
You can't create a consciousness.
Mm.
Buddha thinks that's the wackiest thing he's ever heard. You just can't, because consciousness comes from itself. It's its own continuity. Do you understand, sweetheart? Thank you. What'll do, Matt? What'd that do? Should that do tonight? Good. What's saying?
Chris says, young man.
Go. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've really got to think about this because you can't see or taste or touch or smell consciousness. You can only see it when you're clairvoyant, and that takes you, you've got to get single point of concentration for that. Go on.
Right. So first question is from Suman, and he says, mind is empty, but what is it that holds ignorance as a permanent phenomena?
What is it? What?
What is it that holds ignorance as permanent phenomena?
What is it that holds ignorance as a permanent phenomena? Who's saying that?
Suman.
I don't understand it, Suman. You better phrase it another way, babe. I can't understand, sweetheart. The question makes no sense to me.
Right.
Can you please ask it in another ways? Did Suman write it down? Did he?
Yeah.
She.
So while we're waiting for that one, for another one from Chris.
Yeah.
So ultimately in meditation, we aren't stopping negative thoughts, but we identify them and transform them into positive ones. Is that right?
It's not quite right, but it's sort of good enough. But no, okay, so there's a lot of meditation. So concentration meditation is very specifically to not be engaged in discursive thought. But that doesn't mean when you're learning to concentrate that your thoughts aren't going berserk. The difference is you're not engaging in the berserk. That's the big job we have to learn to step back. So the thoughts are going to be a while before they stop, but we normally engage in the thoughts mindlessly. So that's the miracle. Concentration meditation, the training is to stay on one thing and not get caught up in conversation with the thoughts. You can't make the thoughts go away, but your first step is not engage in them. And that's what begins to help them calm down eventually. That's the point. Okay.
We've not heard back from Suman. So Suman's not written anything else.
Okay,
Suman, do you want
Suman,
to put it
you
in
want to say
chat?
something to me again, Suman, or not? Make another note or speak to me, sweetheart. Sir, madam, I don't know who you are, darling. Not saying anything. Go. Something else there? No. Something else, people. Yeah, sweetheart, go. You know, I've got a hearing aids now. I think I have to start wearing my thing. I keep putting it off. But in this scenarios is where I really need hearing aids, you know. I have to be so rude to get you to repeat all the time. So I'll wear them tomorrow.
Hello, Venerable Robina.
Hello, sweetheart.
So when it comes to Mahamudra, you're focusing on the mind. Is it a single thought that you sort
We're going
of
to discuss
engaging
tomorrow,
with,
darling.
or-
Can you wait till tomorrow?
I'm not in tomorrow. So
Oh, sweetie pie. So what?
I'll try and
It's
catch up
concentrate.
later.
The first component of Mahamudra meditation is exactly the same as if you're watching your breath, except the thing you're watching is whatever pops up in your mind. You start with whatever pops up in your mind. You can't just concentrate on one thought because many thoughts are coming. So you focus on whatever comes. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the point. That's the start. That's the first step to stay. All right. Then there's lots of things to do after that.
Thank
Okay,
you.
darling. Good. Yeah. Someone else? You keep the 4 pictures up there. It's nice. I know it's crowded on the altar, but it looks nice.
Okay,
seeing
so
people.
this one, Danuta says,
Yeah.
can you achieve shamatha as a layperson in the Western world?
Yeah, but as long as you give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and mortgages and dogs and the rest, and go to an isolated place. Yeah, of course. Anyone can do it. You just got to have very specific conditions. It's not because, I mean, it's like to even be the point is to even be qualified to be in a scenario where you can have strict conditions to get to the point where you even want to go there for more than a day without going bonkers. Already that's advanced. You've got already be happy. I mean, Venerable Rene, you must know our Swiss monk, who's a wonderful human being. He's been practicing since, meditation when he first met the Lamas back in the 70s, same time as me, I never meditate. He started almost immediately. Oh, this is someone's question. Good. Hang on a sec, someone. So, okay, I interviewed him in 1995 about one of his first long retreats on single point of concentration. And he said, well before he even got to the scenario to start the retreat, he said he could no way could have been prepared to do it. He's a Westerner, he's not a lay person, but he had vows. He was a monk. He'd done masses of practice, masses of study, even given teachings. That was what prepared his mind. So you've got to be fairly subdued already. I mean, most of us simply could not possibly cope with, we'd all go mad, stir crazy, as we'd say, if we went away for a month in isolation, especially people who've got no training at all. Even those of us who've got training, we would go crazy because we would just, because our attachment's so intense. We need a break, we have to have the food. So to get to the mountains, you've got to have no interest in food. You've got to be, otherwise you'll be in trouble. Spend all your time cooking your meals and complaining and sending back and wanting this nutrition and that nutrition. And I don't like this one, I want that one. How can you meditate? Not possible. So you've already got to be pretty stable and steady to even get to the mountains, to be there like he did was for 2.5 years, you know. And then he said he maybe in the first 6 months, maybe got to the 5th of the 9 stages, but he knew because of the conditions, he couldn't get further. You know, he spent another 18 months. So it's like incredibly sophisticated conditions that you need in order to even get far with your mind. So it's pretty intense. But of course we can in theory, absolutely. So Suman's question is in the chat there. Can you read it out to me?
Yeah, it says, what is the pointing out instructions and does it have many levels?
Suman, I don't understand that question either. I'm very, very sorry. Pointing out, I've heard that phrase. It's used by some lamas, but I don't quite understand that phrase and how it's used. So if you'd like to tell me what it means, I can then have a conversation with you, but I really can't answer it. I'm very, very sorry. It's not a term that my lamas use. I'm so sorry, Suman.
That's it for questions at the minute.
Right,
on
I can't say
chat.
more. Well, why don't we just finish now then? So this is just like a general chat, a kind of, you know, preparation. We'll go to Lama's book tomorrow and look at the teachings and we'll do a little bit and just try to get a feeling really of what's of this. Yeah, I mean, Lama just wanted us to taste our own minds. He wanted us to taste our potential. He tried so hard, you know, to get us to do that, to have some confidence in our potential. That's the key one. Put confidence in our potential. Yeah, so let's hope we can do that. So we dedicate, thinking that within 90 minutes, all these thoughts we've had, the mind being the way it is, no thoughts go astray, that's clear. Everything stays in our memory. All these seeds we've planted every second we've been here together. So we think we're going to nourish these seeds with our practice, with our effort between now and tomorrow, so that we can then, and these seeds, they can grow in the future, no matter how long it takes, in our Buddhahoods for the sake of suffering sentient beings. Jangtrum Semtro Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchi Ke Panyampa, Me Payang Gong Ne Gondu Baba Shog. May bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all. Okay, so somebody I might see you tomorrow. It'd be very nice if I can, sometime after tomorrow. Homework would be to, when you go to sleep tonight, hit the pillow. As your head hits the pillow, make it two things. Make a decision. I'm going to see my dreams as dreams. They always use, the Lamas use as an analogy, and it's in one of the sutras. See life like a dream. See life like an illusion. See life like a, different little examples they use, you know. So like a dream. So it's good to see your dreaming, because we know in dreams we're totally unconscious. We get caught up in the story, don't we? So it's a very nice example to notice, oh, this is just a dream. So make a decision that you might do that. And then second is when you wake up, excuse me, I'm going to say this, you'll all laugh. If you wake up, but of course we believe we will, because we believe we're permanent, you know, we're certain that we'll wake up in the morning. But if you do your research tomorrow morning, you probably count, you know, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people died that night who didn't expect to. So if you wake up, notice you're still alive and make the most of it and hop out of bed and come here and listen and analyze and contemplate our marvelous potential for our sake and the sake of others. Okie doke. Thank you, so kind people, organizing these teachings and you people coming and everything. And Jen Young's nice big fat compound.